Who's Views Spooky Goings On with JT and the WHOTASTIC Panel. It's time to dust off the cobwebs, peel back the layers of reality, and open the casket of the WHOTASTIC Panel to discuss Whorrific.
Hello, welcome to Who's Views. Don't hide behind the cushions yet. It's only us here on the WHOTASTIC Panel. Yes, hello, how are you? Welcome to the show. And welcome to the second part of our Whowloween season. Yes, we've had the Pyramids of Mars review. We've got the Blink review coming up. And now we are going to be talking Whorrific Who. I am joined by Kirsty and Michael. And we have John there, and I'm sure Paul there. I'm sure he's going to come back in any second now. And I'd like to say a huge welcome to our very special guest this evening as well. We've got Peter joining us. Hello.
Hello there, everyone.
Welcome to Who's Views.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to take part.
You're very, very welcome. And Peter, I have to explain, is here with us tonight specifically because he is a huge horror fan, a horror geek. He is an author, and he has, you know all sorts of things about the horror films and what have you, don't you? You're a big expert.
Maybe, well, I don't know about that, but maybe too much. Maybe I know too much, and maybe knowledge is a dangerous thing, but we'll find out.
We will find out. So yes. So what we're going to be doing in this show this evening as part of Wholloween is we're going to be looking at horror in Doctor Who. And I want to start, Pete, by asking you, as our horror geek, our horror expert here, what is horror exactly? What can be classed as horror?
Well, the thing is about horror is, like humour, it's very subjective. You know, what makes one person laugh doesn't, kind of falls flat with someone else. Now, horror is what scares you, so it becomes very personal. So therefore, you've got quite a range, you've got quite a scope. But Robert Bloch, the writer who penned Psycho, he once put it brilliantly. He said, horror is all about displacement.
Oh.
A clown at the circus is quite funny, unless you're frightened of clowns. But a clown standing in the garden at midnight is very different. And that just shows you, taking something that's familiar, you're familiar with the setting, and you're taking it and you're extracting it from somewhere familiar to somewhere that's not so familiar and unexpected, taking the person out their comfort zone. And I think that's where it all begins.
I love that. I think that's fantastic because, that's exactly what Doctor Who's been doing practically all the 60 years it's been around, isn't it, really? I mean, when you look at it like that. I mean, you mentioned Psycho there. Yeah. Can you give us some examples of you've given me some examples here of of your favorite elements here. So we're going to start with this. Now, at this point, I have to say, for anybody that's young, you may want to look away at some of these particular pictures. And if you know these films, you shouldn't necessarily be watching them, in my opinion. But we're going to start with this one. You mentioned it just now. We'll start with this.
Yeah. Well, The Exorcist, yes. Now, a very, very influential and seminal work, because that really raised the bar and set standards exceptionally high. People at the time were used to hammer horror films at that time, and there was a kind of coziness about that. You had the period setting. It was all make-believe, but hold on, this was something that was happening now, a contemporary horror film. And it was just so unnatural, and people hadn't seen anything like it. So it took the audiences out of their comfort zone. Yeah. And I mean, the film actually won an Oscar for sound. Although it's visually distressing, and there's a lot of really harrowing stuff goes on in there, the sound, I mean, there was a lot of people coming out the cinema and they were covering their ears.
Really?
Because the voice of the demon, the baleful sounds coming from the demon, it was extremely unprecedented at the time. So that took the audience right out of their comfort zone. They didn't know what to expect. But the way that film works so well is the fact that it's almost like a documentary. There's very little, even though the music won an Oscar, there's very little musical accompaniment. I had Tubular Bells, certainly, you know, there's elements of music in it, and that's why William Friedkin, the director, was chosen for that film, because he had a background in making documentaries. And he wanted it to have a very clinical documentary feel to it. And it does feel like that. It does feel like you're actually watching a real life event unfold in front of your eyes.
And that was decades before it actually became the rage, of course, via reality television or docu-type dramas.
Well ahead of its time. It really was. 1973 that came out, and you can understand that it was very impactful. Word of mouth, everybody, this was the film to see. Could your nerves take it? It became a kind of litmus test, you know, and people were like seeing, oh, will I be able to handle this, you know?
And it was banned, wasn't it, Pete?
It was banned in video in the UK eventually. I mean, it played in cinemas, and, you know, that was no problem. But in video, it came out, it was on, you could rent it. And then when the BBFC came about in 1984, and there was a huge big ratings overview, and then it was deemed, that's it. Nah.
And as Doctor Who fans, we don't really know anything about those rating systems affecting us at all, do we? Because I mean, Doctor Who had to go through that. Do you remember, guys, when the videos started to appear?
Yeah. Well, that was it. Yeah, I mean, I must admit, you know, it was a bit of a Wild West at the beginning. I mean, I was rating Evil Dead, things like this, you know, and I was only 13, 14. Shouldn't have been happening. I'm glad it was. Yes, of course. But there was films I rented out that there's no way I should have seen. No way. It should have just been the video cover I saw. That was it. But, yeah, and that's why they decided, you know, enough's enough, and get the rating systems in.
When it comes to Doctor Who, you know, Doctor Who has been, it's relied on a lot of horror, especially in its early days. I mean, the first 26 years, there were you mentioned the Hammer horror films there, you know, this beautiful British industry, which was the horror equivalent of the Carry On films, let's face it, because they kept churning these wonderful things out with their wonderful actors and what have you. And Doctor Who sort of fitted in occasionally to all that element. I mean, when you know, we have actors like this, didn't we? You know, classic actors here.
Two genre stalwarts, yes. They're the ones you associate. I mean, even people not familiar with the genre or passionate know Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee, Vincent Price. They go back further, Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff. They're all synonymous, you know, with horror, really.
Yeah. While we go through this as well, Pete, you've given us some other examples here from other horror films. So just let me know when you want to mention those and bring those in. And if there's any, because I'm seeing various aspects of parallels to some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in Doctor Who. So Kirsty's the youngest one here. She hasn't grown up with some of the stories that we did. She's very proud of that fact as well, Who viewers.
And she's never had a VHS either, I'll bet.
Listen, thank you to everybody.
I'm a 90s baby, but I'm still a 90s baby.
Thank you to everybody that's watching us tonight. Please join us in the chat. Let us know what your favourite horror moments, your favourite horror stories in Doctor Who are. What were those moments that made you go, ooh, and couldn't get you to sleep at night because you were worried there was a monster under your bed or something like that? We'll go, and people will keep up with us, obviously, and let us know more about horror as we go through. But it has been there since the very, very beginning. And when I was asking the team about that, I mean, Paul, you mentioned, of course, that marvelous moment where the Doctor meets a couple of people in a funhouse.
Oh yes, well, for those of you who can sit through the wonderful chase, Have you seen The Chase, Kirsty? Look out for that one if you've not seen it already. What spoiler come up if you've not seen The Chase? Frankenstein and Dracula appear at a funhouse with Ian Barber, and Vicky. So look out for that one. But they're not what they seem.
Yeah, and we got this picture of them here. I mean, from any standards, they are very, very, very friendly, aren't they? I mean, they look very friendly. They're not what you're used to, Pete.
No, definitely not. No, but hey, listen, I've got to thank Doctor Who, because Doctor Who and, dare I say, Disney, or specifically the Disney villain, that was my gateway into horror. That's where it all started for me. It was through Doctor Who.
Yeah, is that something that we all share? Because I certainly became aware of horror, especially. I was saying to a friend earlier, when I came to be introduced to Hammer horror, when I found those, I was actually quite comfortable with Hammer horror. They didn't really scare me because it had all been done in Doctor Who. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Well, I found that Hammer used to scare me, particularly with the music. Pete was talking about them being a bit tame, but the you never saw any real horror. The most I remember is maybe when if Peter Cushing and Dracula jumps on the table, pulls the curtains down, and then he gets disintegrated by the sun. And that was as gory as it probably got. But the music was incredible in the Hammer movies. And Peter, we're probably a similar vintage, but I was going to say, you probably remember in the late 70s, early 80s, we had the fantastic double bills of the Universal movies and the Hammer movies. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Every Saturday night, oh my God, yeah, that was me in my element. Honestly, but I used to have to plead with my mum to, oh, please can I sit up and watch it? And usually there was a black and white one on. First it was Universal, right, and the second one was the kind of more, dangerous one. That was the colour one, so that was usually a no, depending on what age I was. I was very lucky if I got to see even half an hour of that one,
Yeah.
But
you're not the only ones, guys, because Pete Harrington's here with us. Hi, Pete. BBC Two double bill. I remember well, mid 1970s to the early 1980s. Frightened. Oh, bless him.
Wonderful memories, definitely. But nothing really. I mean, you were talking about sound and music, especially, and that's very important to enhancing the proceedings. Because there was a lot of films where they take, for instance, Jaws.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that wouldn't be anything without the score, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a great film, brilliantly made, fantastic acting, but that score, everybody remembers.
Well, it's about the anticipation, isn't it, Michael? You've got this big build-up coming through as well, and you've just highlighted there. It does happen in Doctor Who as well. You do get slightly musical scores and build-ups. Kirsty, do you recall any sort of music in the new series where you've gone, ooh?
I'm more different. I get more scared when there's silence.
Ooh.
Like pauses. That's a big phobia of me. So, like big musical build-ups, any sort of situation in New Who, I'm like, on yourself, son, let's go. Like, I'm ready for what's about to happen. But more pauses when you can see his mind or their mind going about what's about to happen, then I'm a bit like apprehensive about what's going to happen, and that starts to freak me out. So I'm a bit different when it comes to that.
That's interesting. That's interesting. That just on the parallel that Peter was saying with comedy and horror, that pause, that holding that tension is. Oh, Peter didn't like my comment. Holding the tension. That's something that comedy and horror both do. They hold tension just that little bit too long to make you feel uncomfortable, don't they, Peter? Or am I mistaken?
No, that's very true, because obviously, especially if you're approaching the punchline, there's that dread and anticipation. Is it going to work? Is it going to be a disaster? Yeah, so very much so. That's probably more horrifying than anything.
I think that parallel you drew on comedy and horror is fascinating, and I think
that's subjective.
Yeah, but I think but it's also very culturally dependent. As you say, people in different countries will find different things scary and different things funny, and that would sort of speak to the Britishness of Doctor Who. It balanced humor, or dare I say comedy, humor and horror very well. And I think that was the key to the old show's success. It was those very well-timed comments from Tom, for example, in a very scary situation, like, Seeds of Doom, for example. It's someone's transforming into a plant, and Tom's dropping these little quips, but not in a smug, annoying, constant Buffy-esque way. He's doing it very well timed when the tension is at its height, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly is. Yeah, I mean, when you're watching the Seeds of Dooms, as a young person, 5, 6, 7 years old, and that was going on. I mean, to see, if we just go back to that one there, to see that pod opening and that thing coming out, I mean, that is borderline horror,
Yeah.
But it's amazing. As a kid, you're just going,
and then it gets punctuated by, like, what the stakes are, and then Tom walks in. And he says, have you met Miss Smith? She's my best friend. And these two gentlemen here, yes. And that's enough just to give a little relief to the audience. But then, bang, you're into the scares again.
One of the scariest bits in Seeds of Doom for me particularly was the bit where Keeler is strapped to the bed and he pleads for Sarah to let him go, to trust him, and he can't control himself. Yeah. And then later on, he's completely transformed, and the butler brings some raw meat for him to eat, which is really scary, horrible stuff.
Yeah. That's one that terrified my sister. She wouldn't come into the room.
Yeah,
she was 23.
Horror and Doctor Who started a long time before that, because it was suggested. I've got an example here from a friend of mine that wanted me to point out this bit. Now, this, of course, is Fury from the Deep, with Patrick Troughton as the incredible second Doctor. And he was saying to me that as a 5-year-old, he was 5 when this was shown. He said the seaweed looked so scary as they were going down the shaft. And we can only imagine, really, what that could have been like. I mean, black and white also emphasizes an awful lot of stuff, because you've got these two characters in this as well. Now, these two are sinister. These two are creepy. These two are pure horror, because they're just the way they move and the way they just creep around, and then that goes on.
I
mean, this is just typical of a horror genre, isn't it?
It's nightmare inducing. I mean, even that one image. God,
that looked like me when the alarm went off, actually.
No, it's where we've got Jack joining us now as well. Hi, Jack. And Jack is saying he discovered Hitchcock at uni, and it sparked his love of old films and TV, including horror. Jack, tell us more about that, and also give us more details of what horror elements in Doctor Who you like. And Peter's saying here, what you've just been saying, that relief with comedy is so important in horror, but it is also quintessentially British to have that element where you're faced with something horrific and then to a throwaway line. Victoria Wood, a great British comedian, used to say things, you will always find British people, they would wander out of some worldwide climactic event, something very, very dramatic, and the British people would always come out laughing and joking. And it was actually true.
I would watch a British horror any day over anything else, because it has that, as you said, I like what you said earlier, Peter, the cozy horror of the Hammer horror films, which I think Doctor Who was a bit like.
It felt safe, it was very theatrical as well, but you felt like you weren't going to come to any harm in a way, because it had a sort of charm about it as well, an old-fashioned charm. You just thought, well, what I'm watching here is not real. I'm perfectly safe, and I was able to make that distinction even from a young age. I just knew that obviously it's the real stuff that is the stuff you need to fear, and this is fiction. I'm not going to come to any harm. It's all make-believe. There's a camera crew all around them. It's all getting done, so I'm okay.
Oh, now you're spoiling it.
No, I don't know.
Spoiler alert, sorry. I'm a bit late. Spoiler alert.
I need to ask this. Sorry, when the Hammer movies came out, I know we're looking at this sort of retrospectively, but when they first came out, how were they received by the general public? They weren't seen as tame films, were they, at the time? Because were the X movies at the time, which means you couldn't go and see it unless you're over 18. So it was quite because even with that, they had some mild sexual and violence, all that kind of stuff in it that could have been perceived. You have to be a certain age to see it, So
yeah, that's it. No, at the beginning they weren't. I mean, certainly they made an impact, but a lot of them. I mean, they had horrendous reviews saying that it was despicable, it was absolutely sickening. What kind of cinema is this we're being subjected to? And they just get tore into it. thinking this will
So
never
Mary
last.
Whitehouse even then. Yeah. So.
Well, it's amazing really, because when you've got sort of films, I mean, Pete, suggesting films like this, I can sort of get why. The Haunting from 1963. Now, was this one of the first ones to actually involve this idea of ghosts and the spooky environment, etc., etc.?
Well, see, I think, with this one, the reason this is so significant was Robert Wise, that directed this one, who went on to
There's
do
a name.
Sound of Music. It's more about it's more about what you don't see in this film, because it's spooky, you know. So it's ghosts in a house, haunted house, terrible history, and it's the banging.
And so that's what Doctor Who does.
That's like what you were mentioning, Kirsty, as well. You know, that was that silence. So there would be moments like that where there would be silent moments, and then all of a sudden the banging would come out of nowhere. But you never
that
saw
freaks
the
me out more than just like a soundtrack.
Well, yes, that would get to you then. Yeah. That would get to you.
Michael,
you delicious black and white as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. I've often said, you know, when you watch the black and whites of Doctor Who from the 60s, you know, I love the fact that the Cybermen can hide in the shadows and stuff like this. Michael, you were going to say something about Doctor Who doing something so well there.
Oh, just that spookiness that Peter was describing there. I think, you know, Doctor Who probably wouldn't work so well with flat out gore if it was, you know, if it was made into a movie and it was blood and guts everywhere. But the spooky atmospheric side of Doctor Who, that's the element that I think works best. I mean, I grew up with, you know, the Hinchcliffe era, like most of us, but so I'm sort of got a predilection to that sort of style, but it's, I think that's where I think it's lacking of that a bit these days. I think it's too scared to take the time to have the silence, to have the creepy tension being drawn. I'm deliberately not putting on a creepy voice. I'm actually just keeping my voice down so I don't want to
that'll be interesting. What we're going to be doing later on in this show is I will be asking you, and this is something you guys that are watching as well can have a think about and answer, but does horror have a place in this very sensitive world that we have today, and especially in 21st century Doctor Who? We'll be coming back to that later on in the show. Don't let me forget, because you know what I'm like. So yeah, but Paul, give us an example of another element that you had where you went, oh, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Well, I've got quite a few, but one particular one that I remember distinctly, and I'd seen it twice and it still scared me, in the 70s, was Brain of Morbius. So the bit in Brain of Morbius that just, the bit where Sarah sees the headless body of Chop Suey, the Galactic Emperor, for the first time when she's blind, and then she her vision starts to come and she sees the headless body. That's horrible, and it scared me when I was a kid, because that costume, I think, with a real arm as well, that is really cool. And the costume looks really fleshy and it looks quite real, you know. It
looks wet, doesn't it? It looks. I mean, look at that. It looks really slimy. It's like
and the brain itself. Michael was talking about gore and Doctor Who. That was really when they dropped the brain as well. Some of it's really scary and gory stuff, you know. And that one in particular, obviously, it's a pastiche or a homage, shall we say, of Frankenstein. But it's a great scary story. And again, the atmosphere in that story, particularly, it's dark, it's atmospheric. Solon's castle is really scary, and you've got Kondo is like a kind of Igor type character as well. So there's a huge homage to Frankenstein in that, but it's a great scary story, and that one stuck with me for a very long time as a kid. And it was that Mary Whitehouse moment the week after. It's in the kid's head till next week. And that was me. So,
you know, as we get older, and we've spoken about that particular thing that Whitehouse used to say, you know, an image stays in the kid's the mind of a child for a whole week. Actually, she was wrong. It stayed in the my head for years, you know, because that. And we'll go back to what Pete was saying there about the music as well. Totally, you know, weird sort of stuff in that story as well. But you know, I understand what you're saying there about the Morbius creature. And obviously, yes, we recognise this as a homage to Frankenstein. It absolutely is, and it works beautifully. And we'll be getting Pete and Kirsty to tell us what they think about this in a minute. But do you know what scared me the most about this episode, guys?
Oh yeah,
No.
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
Even though they turned out to be friends of the Doctor, the Sisterhood of Calm was so creepy. And I couldn't work out whether they were goodies or baddies. As a 6-year-old, I needed to know who was a good and who was bad.
Of course, yeah.
I couldn't work them out. Honestly, Kirsty, they were just drifting around doing their own thing, thinking everybody was a game. So 21st century, it's unbelievable. Have you seen the Brain of Mobius, Kirsty?
I've seen it in real life. It was I went to the exhibition with my father in April, and he's right at the end. And I remember him going, "Oh yeah, I remember that one." So he is big, and I was like, "Yeah, I can see why that could, as a child, freak you out." Because even him going, "Nah, still no." And it was interesting in a horror point of view as well in that exhibition that a lot of them you see on the TV or you can rewatches again, you're like, okay, that'll still scare you. But then when you see it in real life and in person, you're like, oh, okay. Because the Daleks that I've grown up with, the copper style shaped ones, petrifying. And I remember the first episode as well that they were coming back with Christopher Eccleston. I was like, yeah, they are etched in everyone's mind how they're scary. But then at the exhibition, when the other Daleks you saw from Old Who, they were more sinister. They were big boys, like they were chunky boys, and they were more sinister than the ones that I grew up with. So it was really interesting seeing. Yes, they were more thick than the ones that we've got nowadays. The better models to me personally. But it was fascinating seeing all of them in life and in person as well. It's an easy job for them to add how scary they would be for acting as well. So yeah,
interesting. I mean, the Frankenstein myth, of course, was bound to make its way in Doctor Who at some point, and we were very lucky that we got it when we did in the Brain of Mobius at a time where it was just really going for it with these horrific elements in the actual show. We've got people actually saying here, we've got Peter, thank you all for joining us this evening. Nice to see you all. Quatermaster in the Pit TV series on VHS, In the Dark, the scene of the worker running out of the pit and the undulating churchyard ground. Anything with the churchyard is going to be a little bit spooky though anyway, isn't it? We've got Peter also saying Dudley's music adds so much to the Brain of Mobius. And we've got David watching. Hi, David. As for Doctor Who, I think Fang Rock takes it for horror. He finds the isolation and the little you see of the aliens be why the movie Alien was also so effective.
That's a good point. It's the claustrophobia, isn't it?
Jack is saying Davros. He's pure horror. His look, his voice, complete maniac, and his absolute favourite villain. Always good to know. David's also saying here, he thinks the UK horror, The Descent, is his favourite horror. Pete, you'll know that one. Not because it's the scariest, but the Britishness of it is so relatable and felt so real to me. I recommend it if you haven't seen it. There we go, everybody. There's one to actually look at. There's a film. Thank you for that, David. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us.
It's very good, actually, that film. Very good to see it with an audience in the cinema.
Really?
Very jumpy.
Okay. Yeah. I want to bring up David's point here now as well. Good timing there, Dave. Even though Android Invasion takes a bashing, I think in terms of horror, it does an amazing job in the first half. It's very eerie. Now, this is actually something I wanted to bring in because a couple of us do have memories of the Android Invasion. And what I find quite scary about this is actually Village of the Damned, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Go on, Paul.
I was going to say, the thing about Android Invasions for me is it's when your friends, the people you relate to, the Doctor, Sarah, have copies or doubles or clones or whatever they happen to be, or taken over by, when something happens to them, that's when it gets really scary.
Yeah.
So when Sarah's got a double and the cliffhanger to when they're
can I just say this one as well? Look at this. I mean, not only, these are creepy even in the photograph, aren't they?
Yeah.
The way the actors are playing it, the way Tom and Liz play it. I mean, do you remember when this android of Liz sat up like that, bolt upright?
Yeah.
You remember, Michael?
Yeah. And I also remember thinking, I also remember thinking something was up with the Doctor as well, because he never did up his coat like that.
Oh, oh,
As the Doctor's about to grab Sarah, and that's really quite scary, and she runs off, the real
Yes.
Sarah, and then the two androids, Doctor and Sarah, walk off after her. That's horrible, you know. And you worry about what's going to happen to your friends, because you think if they get they're gonna go and meet the Benton and Harry at the search center, and what's going to happen? You get really scared for yourself and for the people you love in the show. It's quite scary, you know.
It really was scary, wasn't it? But in that whole element, I mean, Pete, you will know all this sort of stuff about. I want to talk more about the elements of being taken over by, because that's happened countless times in Doctor Who, but it's something that it shares with horror. But you know, I mean, we've got to talk, Paul, about Android Invasion, because this was one of your choices as well, about that famous cliffhanger. So, you know, I mean, the world ended, Kirsty, for some of us back in this particular day when this happened. Paul, take it away. Tell us about this.
Well, let's say an android invasion, as the title might suggest, there's lots of androids in it, so there's lots of doubles of people. Spoilers. Yeah, spoilers. So there's lots of doubles. Most of the characters have a double in it. You just about. And at one point in the story, for those who don't know, Sarah becomes an android. The Doctor doesn't know initially, but he gets a few clues when he offers her some ginger beer. And she takes some ginger beer and she says, "Oh, that's lovely." But the original Sarah said she hated ginger beer. Then later on, they're going off to go back to the TARDIS, and they have a bit of a fight. She pulls a gun on him, and the Doctor does a very Naked Gun style, knock the gun out of her hand, and knocks her over, and her face falls off. And there's a shot, a very close like that. Oh, that's horrible, yeah. And her face falls off, and that's the cliffhanger. And Sarah is a baddie, and that was again in your mind for 10 years. That was it. So.
And because it was Sarah, we were all totally. I mean, I remember some of my friends at school go
traumatized.
She turned into a robot. No, she can't be. She can't be. But Paul, you gave me some very interesting information about this, didn't you? Because apparently, well, we're not saying anything, but we know how Doctor Who would like to play homages to this, to what had gone before. I had to do it. It was Paul, Pete, that you will know this, Peter, but it was Paul that told me about this.
Yes, the Jean Marsh episode of Twilight Zone. Yeah,
that's right. That was on actually just a Sunday night.
Oh,
I think that's on
Sunday night. I think that was that not on Legend?
Oh, that's a good homage.
I think it was. Yeah.
I mean, that was. But do you remember the Bionic Woman with Lindsay
Wagner? Please, I had a crush on Jamie Summers. Please.
There's some robot baddies in that as well with similar faces, weren't there?
The Fembots.
That's the Fembots. That's right. Yeah.
That's that. Yeah.
You wouldn't be allowed to call them that these days, would you? Let's face it. I actually do remember those as well, but this was news for me. I mean, this has been one of my all-time cliffhangers, Kirsty, Michael, ever. This really is one of my all-time, because the impact it really had on me was just like, oh my God, what's happened to Sarah? And then being worried for an entire week. But then to see this coming off the back of that is just incredible. It shows how everything ties around, how you can actually play homage to stuff and do that twist on stuff. I just think that is absolutely wonderful, you know.
And it came not long after Harry was questionable in Terror of the Zygons. So there's a lot of this this theme of not being able to trust your friends going on. I'm not sure.
Well, it was very unsettling. Yeah, it was very, and as Pete said at the very beginning, that's what horror is, isn't it? It's to take you out of your comfort zone. We've got Peter saying that his Doctor has a sore throat. I mean, I'd like to say hello to Blue Planet. Thank you for joining us. Halloween 3 also stole that idea, did it?
Yeah, because that was often compared to Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean, that's a standalone film. It's nothing to do with the rest of the franchise and Michael Myers. If you watch that film and accept it as a film in its own right, it is really good. It's really good.
Gosh, we're going into other fans' territory there, because there's probably a huge debate on that one, and we've got our own. So we'll move on.
It's a good film. Good film. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Michael, what? So with this, give us one of your examples of what.
Well, I was going to say this also. This whole theme of not being able to trust, friends and doppelgangers and all this sort of stuff. Another one that kept cropping up in Doctor Who was is it lycanthropy, turning into something animalistic, and one that springs to mind, obviously for me, is Inferno. I found that terribly creepy. You know, the noise that these things were making, and the eerie atmosphere. It wasn't so much music; it was more of a soundscape.
Sound is important.
Yeah, and it was just with the oil, the machines and the drilling and all that sort of stuff, and there was just a bit to Kirsty's point. It was the lack of music in Inferno that made those guys a little bit more creepy. So yeah, Inferno, and of course that sort of thing happened a lot in Doctor Who. I mean, Curse of Fenric, where they really reignited the horror suspense element. It had been absent for a while, but that lycanthropy kind of am I using the right word there, Peter?
Yeah, the werewolf, more or less.
Or turning into something else. Yeah, a bit animalistic. Yeah, so I mean, they were more vampires, I guess. Yeah, but definitely Inferno, and the impending doom. The whole world that they're in is going to disappear shortly, and the Green Death with the sickness and the veins and all that sort of stuff. The thought that that plays into our own subconscious, doesn't it? Someone being ill, heaven forbid. I think it speaks to that sort of our lizard brain.
Oh,
anything green, unless you're a Celtic fan, is going to really be quite repellent, But
and bubble wrap.
Maybe a Rangers fan, but that's the Wirren arc of space.
Yeah,
I mean
and it was genuinely scary. I was terrified when he pulls his hand out. I was scared. What's he turning into?
Yeah. I mean that was me. I just thought, oh my God, the gloves are off, and that was so messed up. But I loved it. I mean, I didn't shy away from it, and I kept watching it. Because that was the thing about it. It's addictive.
But the concept of characters turning into something else is terrifying. Yeah.
Well, that's the thing about Doctor Who and horror in general. You like to be scared. I'm quoting from a documentary for Doctor Who, but people go to, and you'll agree with this, Peter, go to late night horror movie screenings at Halloween and go like midnight screenings of The Exorcist or whatever to be scared because they like that kind of thing. And that's why we like it as Doctor Who fans. We like to be scared. I mean, and going back through history, nursery rhymes or fairy stories are full of things that scare kids, and that's why I like it about Doctor Who. And I think we should have more of that, in Doctor Who, because it's part of the fibre of the show.
The original versions of some of those nursery rhymes. A friend of mine got a PhD on those, and they're terrifying. I mean, Hansel and Gretel is just horrific.
Oh, Hansel and Gretel's awful. I mean, I always said in the wilderness years that we know and love, if they were to bring back Doctor Who, Hansel and Gretel could be a story that they could actually do in Doctor Who.
That would be amazing.
There could be somewhere in the woods with this witch type character. I don't know. I'm just going off on one now. We've got that.
No, we're having a workshop. It's good. We're having a workshop.
Yeah, you better write that copyright down immediately, JT.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we've got. I mean, the other thing, Pete, about the arc in space, and I know this is one of yours that you remember vividly from when you were a kid. It wasn't just the bubble wrap that got us all. It was the other horror element of this, as we've discussed in our review of the arc in space, was the fact that the Wirren actually laid its eggs inside a host. In this case, a human being. Now that is pure horror, is it not?
Well, that's obviously influential. Look at Alien years later,
which came after. Yeah,
lots of other. The Thing as well, I suppose you could more or less.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in a way, I suppose not so much the egg laying, but the fact that it's taken on different forms, and that harks back to the fact that you can't trust anyone because anybody could have been the Thing. You just didn't know because it was taking over the bodies. You just didn't know. But it was more or less the invasion of the body snatchers in the 50s.
Yeah.
1956, you just didn't know whether to trust your best friend or your neighbour.
I have a story about that, actually. My mum went to see the original version at the cinema, and she told me this great story. They came back from the cinema absolutely petrified, and she had to look under her bed before she went to sleep to make sure there was no pod under the
Pods
bed
underneath.
that was going
I
to change
love
her
it.
into one of the aliens. Yeah, that was incredible.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
I absolutely love that. But didn't we all do that as kids? Didn't we?
I'm sure, yeah.
Occasionally check under
I
the
still
bed.
do it. I still do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You need to.
I do. Sometimes.
But you live in Australia. You need to. There could be
Yeah,
some
true.
great
We've got-
Yeah, it's true that.
Bloody spider. But I was going to ask you, Peter, and forgive me if I'm digressing, JT.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
That whole, being, you're not sure about the people you know. Did that stem from the communism threat of the 50s and so on? Was that something that came out of
the
that?
invasion of the body snatcher. Yeah, that was the kind of allegory, I suppose.
Right.
With regards to that,
Yeah.
that's what it can be seen as. The fact that you
Mm.
didn't know who your enemy was. It could be right in your neighbourhood, you know. But they kind of transposed it into the pod creatures, the fact that it's taking over your body and
that's what I find fascinating about horror and comedy as well, is the culture they come out of and what's happening at the time and the issues that are going on. It's you can't watch any of this stuff in a vacuum, can you?
No,
you can't.
It's true.
Okay. I mean, and it's great that this it can actually work itself into Doctor Who through all the original 26-year run, and we're going to touch about the modern series as well, because some of Kirsty's examples come from the modern day, which is absolutely fine. But one element that Paul and I shared, which was wonderful, and we're talking about this right now, is there's been an awful lot of this whole thing about taking over people in Doctor Who, taking over. And I want to talk a little bit more about this, but there is one particular element that has always stood out. For once, it doesn't involve Sarah Jane either. It's Perry.
Yeah.
A poor old Pippa Gilliam Brown, because out of all the things that happens to her, I mean, this is one of these companions you really feel about, isn't it? Because you get the impression through Perry's run that she's quite uneasy with this thing, with going through time and space, and sometimes you would just think, actually, she should just get out of there, going home, because something nasty is going to happen to her one day. And unfortunately, one day it actually does, and she gets taken over in the worst way possible, because they actually kill her, and they put into her brain this Kiv, don't they? I mean, they actually put Kiv into her brain, therefore killing Perry. And this, in 1986, for me, was Doctor Who at its horrific best. I mean, for all of you that have seen this, a wonderful performance by Nicola Bryant as well in her last moments in Doctor Who. But what were you guys thinking at this particular point? Were you think this was crossing the line, or was it brilliant? What was
this was fantastic. It really was. It was such a great, at that point, departure for the companion. What a dramatic way to go. Great performance from Nicola Bryan, and really startling way to go. My jaw was completely hanging off the floor, dropped with shock when this happened. I mean, we never had the death of Adric was one thing, but this was a real kind of a companion you actually were quite fond of, and I was gobsmacked when this happened. The tragedy, there's a caveat to this. So the most horrific part of this story was about 6 weeks later when we're told she married Brian Blessed, but that's another story.
That was just as horrific. Well, I'm not sure whether that was more horrific than the actual end.
Yeah, true.
Wow.
But I had the same reaction, Paul, and unlike other transformations in Doctor Who, where it was like a sudden flash or whatever, this was a surgical procedure, which made it even worse.
Yeah.
It was a slow build up to this.
It was like Solon, but updated, wasn't it? What he was trying to do with Morbius, it gives you that impression that he was actually before, technologically wise, here in Mind War, where they got it down. This guy had actually found out how to do what that was practiced on. I love that element, and that's just me being a fan geek, of course, tying everything together. That's just me being that. But I love that idea to think. But again, let's talk about the music, because Pete mentioned the music. The music to Mind Warp, it gives you the willies even now when you listen to it. It's absolutely horrible. I mean, how genius is that score, especially at that moment? Because you were talking there, Kirsty, about silence. This whole operational process, after a little while, is silent. And then we just get Nicola's booming voice coming out as Kiv. Oh man, I'm getting goosebumps listening to it.
It's such a shame they lost the tapes, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, for the music, yeah.
Yeah.
But they've recreated
recreated it. Yeah.
They lost them. But I mean, I have to say, one of the scariest moments, I think, especially of 80s Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Really was.
The brilliant thing as well, sorry to interrupt it, is that you watch it with your family. So if you're watching it with your kids are going to be still petrified. But even as adults, then you're like, especially like a surgical procedure, you're like, oh. So and they still have that quality as well. But especially the original, that you'd be sitting with your kids and then they'd be petrified, but then you'd be like having to be like the parent being like, okay, it's fine, but then actually being quite scared about stuff like that. So that's just the brilliant thing again about comedy, the kind of lightness, but then to the darkness of horror as well. So
Yeah.
You're all sitting there having your tea as well, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
But did anyone else have that? Did anyone else have that experience of parents telling you, if you're going to be frightened by this, you're not watching it? So therefore, you would sit there going, "I'm not being frightened by this because I can't miss it."
Yeah, that happened to me. Oh God, every year I think from age 7.
I got more of that with Buffy.
Aye.
My family were big Buffy fans, and I was petrified. That's why one of the ones that I'm going to mention later on, that I was petrified of Buffy, and one of the characters, the Master, and the amount of times, like, so I can handle horror. It's just someone in a mask. It's again the camera crew are all there. It's fine. I'd actually have to leave the room or go upstairs and play in my bedroom because I was like, no, I cannot do that. I nearly, even in my mid-20s, nearly emancipated my parents because they sent me a photo of the Master when I was living abroad, and I threw my phone at a restaurant because I opened my message up going, oh, they sent me a message, and it was a photo of the Master that they'd freeze framed and sent it to me. So I have to always, even though coming into nearly into my 30s, going like,
social services, Kirsty.
Letting his PCC up.
You're in luck, Kirsty, because we've got a clip of that very episode right now.
Bye.
I wish we could. Jack is saying here that one of the scariest moments in Classic Who is the Mask of Mandragora, when Sarah Jane gets hypnotized. She creeps up behind the Fourth Doctor, creepily smiling with a poison needle to kill him. And again, it's played beautifully, isn't it? It's just absolutely there. Yeah, and it is creepy because, as we were saying before, it's one of your friends gone rogue at that particular point. Pete's saying here the Zygons was another body takeover.
Yeah.
Doctor Who is peppered and fantastic for kids. Yeah,
and the music
Zygons
in that is brilliant too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Michael touched on that. Harry Sullivan as a Zygon double is really scary, isn't he? I mean, he's so evil, and Ian Marter plays it brilliantly. He's so nasty as the evil Harry. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Pete's also saying here as well that his mum stopped him watching Doctor Who, The Web of Fear, as a treat. I don't remember being scared. Okay, fair enough. That's fair. So, Kirst, we'll come to you now. Give us one of your and yes, she's one of these young ones. She is absolutely. So, I think this is very interesting from my point of view because there I will be, and the others as well who are older than me. They'll all be there. We're all looking at it from our lovely age and thinking, oh, wow, look at this. So you're looking at the modern Doctor Who. What was it first that caught your attention that didn't make you sleep?
So yeah, I was thinking more of it because again, I had to grown up with it. It's just the masks. I was thinking over it again with the attachment of Buffy with the silence. And they had the character, the gentleman in Buffy as well, about losing your voice, and they had that you were losing your voice, and Buffy had lost her voice, and just that brought me back when I saw the silence again to being that little girl petrified. Being petrified of them, and actually that was taking me back to like a wee inner child going, no, cannot handle that, with the fingers and everything as well. So again, the horror element that it can take you back to that wee kid scared and wanting to hide behind the sofa or go out of the room as well. But one big thing, again, with what I was talking about, how I struggle with silence in programs. It's a weird phobia. Credits are silent, middle bits that there's no music and it is just the suspense. That really gets me going. That freaks me out. I don't know what's about to happen. And I remembered the Family of Blood, that not in a mask or anything big and scary. That the premise of that is actually, and again, a body taken over.
Yeah, well,
as
several.
Well. Several bodies taken over, and so many different, almost in a kind of horrible point of view, like how there's the elements and tones of World War One, the body taking over, and one thing that is great about the horror with Doctor Who, that he's always there to save the day, but you never really see that much that the baddies have caused him to actually get really annoyed at the end with the watch, and when he's fully back as the Doctor, and it's that cracking shot of Ken's eyes popping up, and like it's rare to see the Doctor actually being annoyed. And
so did that scare you, that element of seeing the Doctor
that way? That actually the jolly person that will always come and save the day actually is quite, that it was my fiance and I were talking about this as well, that when someone can be happy and they're always angry, if someone's annoyed, you see them really angry, but when it's always the happy jolly one that snaps, then you go, oh, okay. And it was sort of that situation as well. So you could throw that tone in, the World War One, and that also because he has fallen in love with Joan and with like Rose and different characters as well, that he wants something more but always has to stop that because he has to go and save the world. So it's the anger again with it snapping, you go, okay, there's something that's really quite scary.
How old were you when the Family of Blood was broadcast?
2007, so I was probably about 12.
Oh, wow. And as a 12-year-old, when you're watching this, did you understand what had happened to these people, these totally innocent people? Or was this lost
Not really, and actually rewatched it again, and that's what I was like, wow, as an adult, there's even more that I'm actually catching up on from watching from when I was like a pre-teen, which was amazing as well to see, again, something that I've watched, but almost with fresh eyes. And that, I was like, yeah, this is actually even more scarier than watching it as a child, because you're like, oh, these scary people. We were laughing about a sister of mine with the balloon that Pennywise is going to jump out at any minute as well.
I think most of us would have got that, wouldn't we? I mean, I got that reference to the red balloon because I remember the original Pennywise when it was Pete. Who was it? It was Tim
Curry.
Tim Curry. Thank you. See, that's why he's on the show, because I'm losing my marbles and he's got them all there. But I wonder. I would like to know if that was actually for that, because that significance of the red balloon throughout that episode of Family of Blood, that was actually quite, for me, chilling. It was quite scary.
I agree.
I kept going, here, Georgie.
As Kirsty was saying, when the Doctor's vulnerable as a fan, that's quite scary. And Pyramids of Mars, you talked about, I think, briefly in your review the other night there, when the Doctor's taken over by Sutek, and he's in that's really scary, because the Doctor, he's completely helpless. He can't do anything. He's, the Sutek's controlling his body. When the there's a bit, I think, in Planet Spiders when the Doctor has to face his fear, and you can see Pertwee's almost crying in his eyes. It's incredible. It's scary. And you just really feel for him, and I feel scared because the Doctor's going to lose, and he never loses. Well,
sorry. No, I was going to say I agree with you, Kirsty. That Family of Blood is actually my favorite New Who episode, the story, I should say. And I think the atmosphere in that story is incredible. But as you say, when the Doctor's angry and he goes from quipping to anger, I agree. That's a creepy thing. And I mentioned Seeds of Doom before, where the Doctor was quipping. He also gets very angry in that episode, which was, I remember as a kid finding that equally unnerving. When he says, "Never mind how I know, Scorby, just take it from me." He's just like, he hasn't got time for this crap.
Yeah. And that was very much that particular Doctor, wasn't it? Sorry, Pete, go ahead.
No, I'm saying it's out of character, isn't it? You
sort of step back. It is in normal life when someone that might be really angry or will get fiery up and has a bit of a fiery temper, but it's always, you have to watch out for the quiet ones.
I know.
Yeah.
When they snap, really that's that you've crossed the line. And it is just that cracking camera angle when his eyes pop up, and you're like,
and they talk about it. They actually talk about the fury of the Time Lord, and it's that quiet.
Yes,
fury,
and that beautiful.
Works so much better.
With,
I mean, you talked about it,
and when you're always looking in the mirror as well, and that simplicity of it's not someone in a mask. It's all scary. But always just look in the mirror because you never know.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I don't like that.
And you just go, it is, and it's a brother of mine doing that monologue, and you're just like, and he's a great actor with like other bits and bobs he's done, and it's just especially how he delivers that. You're like,
he'd be a good doctor as well, wouldn't he, Michael?
Sorry, say that again.
He'd be a good doctor.
He would have been, yeah. Kirsty, I completely agree with you. That quiet rage, and you mentioned Buffy before. The Angel, David Boreanaz does that very well too. That quiet, seething. Oh, he's annoyed now. Anyway, I digress.
We've got some great comments in here. David's asking us, sorry guys, if you've already talked about this, we haven't, but do you class Enlightenment as horror? I find the whole vibe of it to be really unsettling, the emptiness of the Eternals. Great stream, by the way, JT. Thank you very much. Glad you're enjoying it, David. Thanks for joining us. I personally wouldn't class Enlightenment as a horror, but I can see where you're coming from. I might have to reevaluate that because, there is that thing. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, I think I'll have to revisit that one myself.
Yeah.
Certainly, the two on the ship, I've got the name, Keith Barron, another actor, I've forgotten the character's name now. They're very zombie-like in their delivery, aren't they? They're quite still and there's no emotion, so they're almost zombie-like a little bit, aren't they? But
that's what Pete Harrington's saying here. The lack of emotions, it's creepy, and the big face. Yeah, I mean it is, isn't it? Really, really. I want to say hello to Gary as well. Hi, Gary. Nice to see you joining us. I mean, I'll have to go back and maybe we should review Enlightenment early in the new year. Everybody to see what that's all about as well. Gary was actually saying that I put it up before, but he's saying his first really chilling memory is Sarah menaced by Zygon Harry in the barn. That was a bit harrowing, actually.
I don't know. I just think maybe it was me. I mean, that's maybe what happens when you start off watching Hammer horror films as well as Doctor Who. But I actually found the Zygons quite cuddly. I didn't. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weirdo.
Things all over them.
They're like giant babies, Peter. So maybe that's why.
I don't know.
Very, 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 very bizarre. Yeah.
I liked them. I thought they were quite nice. Quite sweet.
David's on that bombshell. David's saying, yeah, definitely. I think it's timeless as well. I think Enlightenment is great because it's a story that's almost above the Doctor in a way. The sheer power of the Eternals, so much so that they are bored. I get what you're saying. So yeah, I think we'll have to have a look at that as a review in the new year, so that I can. It's interesting.
All powerful, and they had to rely on sails. They couldn't get an outboard motor. I mean, come on, they're not that.
I mean, one thing I want to talk about as well, because we did talk about this in part one of this trilogy, if you like, of Whorrific Who here on the channel. But Pete, the role of Egyptology in horror, what is that about? Why was Egyptology so horrific and so attractive to people making these these Hammer horrors or these flicks? What was going on there?
I don't know. I think it was just the whole magic and mystique about it. It's the fact that it was maybe a kind of untapped into territory, and so you were not familiar with what was coming, So there you've got the unexpected, because you're not sure what they have up their sleeve, and if you're caught off guard, then you're in trouble, But that was part of the appeal, to me anyway. To me.
Do you think it was also because it was something to do with the fact that, well, let's face it, from a horror point of view, mummies are very attractive, aren't they?
Yeah, I know. But
even this fella.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hammer. Yeah, that's Christopher Lee under all that. Believe it or not.
Yeah, Christopher Lee.
Oh, is it?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, well, he's had a bad day at the office.
Yeah, he definitely did. He's obviously overworking him, but I mean that was the 50s. Wasn't health and safety then. I mean, the mummy, I didn't actually ever feel threatened by mummies in films. I don't know why that was, but anything.
I think it may be the slowness of movement. There's a bit of a running gag of the fact that they walk really slowly, and it takes forever to catch their prey, doesn't it?
Well, see, that's true, but that all changed when I saw a Hammer film called The Mummy's Shroud.
Oh, yeah.
It's the fastest mummy you've ever seen in your whole life. I mean, you're talking, it's like bloody, it's so energetic, and you didn't stand a chance. You know, he was really coming at you. I mean, he was legging it for you.
Was he?
That goes that theory that, you know, you can run away from them. There's always one.
Yeah. It's always amazed me, though, that Doctor Who never really has, has never really, here are ours. Here are our Doctor Who mummies from the Pyramids of Mars. There they are. And I think they're beautiful to this day. I think they look absolutely stunning. 5-year-old me, as I said in our previous show here, when we reviewed Pyramids of Mars, was terrified of these things, because here they were lumbering around. Yes, they weren't legging it, Pete, but they were around. And they were in the forest. They were in this beautiful house set. They were on Mars, for crying out loud. And there was something that was really, really, really scary about them. But with the Doctor Who twist, of course, they are robots. But it didn't matter. Those things had a huge impression on me. I don't know about you lot.
They're very scary creations because they don't speak, which is part of the scariness of them. They don't say anything at all. They're very blank, non-expressive. Again, what we talked about. There's no emotion.
Yeah, anything without facial features, is definitely a winner.
Yeah, there's something humans need, don't we? We need those facial recognition things there, because you can look at things like Spider-Man stuff, and I can get quite scared. Gary, thanks very much for pointing out Relzo Delgado was in the Shroud. That's brilliant. Doctor Who
was in that. Yeah.
Doctor Who took years to revisit a mummy, and they did it completely differently the second time they did it.
I didn't really like that episode. I wasn't feeling it.
Oh, did you not? You're not? Oh.
No.
Do you think, though, I wasn't very scared about this. I'm very impressed by that, I have to say, because I think that does have elements of the sort of horror thing that we're talking about here today, and Hammer horror. You can see the empty ribs. It does remind me of the modern mummy films that were out in, what was it, the late 90s, early 2000s?
I grew up with those ones, and they're my mummy.
Yeah. First one was all right. Second one was a wooden go. But do you think kids would have, Paul? Do you think kids would have been scared of that?
I think depending on your age, because I think it was very scary. The fact you can see the ribs, and it's like a walking skeleton, isn't it? It's really quite scary. What I liked about it, and maybe Peter can confirm the movie, it was maybe paying homage to. There's a countdown before people die, and I think there's a horror movie that did that trope. And I can't remember what it was called. And it's like there's a countdown when people are going to get murdered or get killed by the monster or something. And they're the same thing with the mummy in this episode. I can't remember what the film was called. Do you recall what it was called?
I can't think. I know there was a countdown element to revealing. There was a film called The Beast Must Die.
That might be it.
It was Guess Who the Werewolf Is, and they had
right.
They had this kind of.
I played that in clubs, Pete.
Well, the William Castle, he had a thing in the 50s, 60s, late 50s, early 60s, called the. It was always very gimmicky, and he made a film called Homicidal that had a fright break in it, and the clock came on, and that was when the big reveal was going to happen. And that's when they did the similar, they were going to reveal who the werewolf was, and the beast must die. The timer on, the clock came on ticking by.
I've just got a great idea. Do you know how sometimes production teams these days jump on bandwagons that other production teams have done, like this whole musical thing, which is still going on 30 years after the event or something like that?
Star Trek, the musical thing. Oh my God, I was about to flip tables.
Well, we won't talk about that one, but you've got all this sort of stuff. There was a whole load of stuff recently about live shows. Now, if Doctor Who ever gets around to doing a live show, that's what they should do, Pete. They should take that theme where they've got this sort of countdown, which is live to the broadcast time, to where a reveal is going to happen. That could be a sort of horror. That'll get people watching, wouldn't it?
Almost like a kind of bomb going off kind of thing. You've got. you've got all this time to make your mind up
So,
about
a bit like
who's
Countdown, then,
behind
really.
yeah. They do this theme.
Oh, I love it! I love it! I love it! I want to talk about now. It sort of ties in with what we were talking about people being taken over. But again, from a friend of mine who was 5 in 1966. I wonder if you can guess what he was telling me about here. When they threw back their Parker hoods as they entered the base on the walkway, as a 5-year-old watching, I was thrilled, and I never ever forgot it. What's that about?
10th planet.
Absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
Now have a look closely, everybody, at this face, and look at those eyes.
Yeah.
Now that is something that was sort of repeated in the 1980s version in Earthshot with the Cybermen with the jaw, but that is absolutely horrific, isn't it? I mean, come on,
Yeah.
this is 1966.
That's great, isn't it?
When you got a better quality copy of this, I had a ropey pirate copy in the 80s, and you couldn't make them out very well. But the when you got a proper copy, if you look at their eyes, you can see the actor's eyes through
It's
the mask.
horrible.
And that's deliberate. It's not a mistake, and it's incredible. That and the real hands as well. Again, a bit like the Morbius creature, it's like incredible having real hands.
Yeah.
I just
That's
look
the
at
sort
those
of thing when
eyes.
you're lying in bed and you don't know what the shadow is, or there's a light flash and you think something like that's going to come out and get you.
Yeah. And can you imagine though, Kirsty? I mean, 1966 is before any of our times here. And my friend, as he said, gave me that quote there. I can understand why that stayed on his mind to this very day. I mean, there you are as a 5-year-old watching this thing, and then oh my goodness! But the eyes there, truly horrific, because it shows that last remaining aspect of humanity. If you did it now, I'm sure you could see the pain in the eyes. You would have it slightly blooded, wouldn't you, round the actor's eyes maybe as well. You would show the real horror of this, because that is pure. I mean, that was genius.
Can you put the picture back just for a second, JT?
I can, yeah.
It shows how desperate they are to survive, that they're using sellotape to keep themselves together. Look at the top there.
Trust you to bring us down to earth.
I mean, fair dues to Sandra
It's a great
Reid
costume, a fantastic costume.
there. Sandra
What was it,
Reid
Michael?
I was just going to say fair dues to Sandra Reid there, or Alexandra Tynan. Incredible work she did on those costumes. Yeah.
But I don't think, when you look at what they've done today with these creatures, we've lost that element of horror. And this is what always makes me think, why have we lost? Because this is scary. And I think now, especially where we are in society now, around the world, we should be frightened of all this sort of stuff, because this is actually becoming fact. What was once science fiction is now becoming fact. We've got people swapping parts of the bodies for all sorts of plastics, which is environmentally friendly, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, that's what the original idea behind the Cybermen was, wasn't it? Because Kit Pedler saw what would happen in the future with organ
transplant
and things like that, and prosthetics and limbs and all that kind of stuff. So he saw that coming, didn't he?
Yeah, being the scientist he was. I mean, Michael, what's your opinion of the Cybermen, and especially that particular one? I mean, is that something that could work today, do you think?
For me, it would work. General audiences, I don't know whether it would work, because I think everything's just become a bit too sanitized now, especially for this sort of program. I mean, I think when we were talking about that, just as a side note, that mummy there before, you were saying how scary it looked with the ribs. I think the buffer for the scares on that particular costume was the fact that it was a train in space, which is absolutely absurd. So because it was so, everything else is played a bit silly, it's not as frightening. Now, if that costume had appeared in the Knock Knock episode with the creepy house, it might have been a bit more scary. So I think the context of some of these things plays into it as well. But yeah, I think if producers made the Cybermen creepy and not relatively speaking to this as the 60s were, make them creepy again and spooky and lumbering and rather than just tin soldiers, I think the public would lap it up.
I think when they brought them back for Capaldi's last outing, they did kind of try to improve
Danny
on
Pink.
them. Yeah, no, not Danny Pink. Later on, towards the end, when the master came back, Johnson came back at the end of his tenure. There was they brought the Mondasian Cybermen back, as they're called now, strangely, but they made them really a bit more sanitized, a little bit. What was creepy in that was they had the process of them being made when they had like these bandages on their heads and stuff, and were carrying a drip around with them. Was much more
that was great. I thought
than
that
the
was
end
great.
effect, but they made them more. They made them much more sort of friendly looking rather than being sinister like they were in the 10 Planets. It was such a shame.
Pete, when it comes to horror, I mean, is there anything like the Cybermen that was, in the old days of horror as well? Was there anything that was there, or was Doctor Who actually at the top of its game when it came to this and completely original?
I think it was. I mean, I was used to the Hammer, and I think you knew what you were getting, and that's what I meant. It was cozy because you thought, well, okay, Dracula, you weren't expecting to see Frankenstein in a Dracula film and vice versa. And you thought, well, Dracula's going to be there. That's fine. I can handle that. But you knew you were getting Dracula. In Doctor Who, you just didn't know what you were getting.
You still don't, let's face it.
You didn't, you just had that title and it was an episode and that was it. And you thought, I don't know what this monster's going to look like. And that for me really made an impact. That resonated with me. It was the unknown.
Is that why you asked me to show this?
Yes. Yeah. Now that's when I was watching that Saturday night. No, it was a Tuesday night, I think. And actually, I was watching it in the living room, and I thought I was going to have a bowel movement. Seriously, when that thing came out,
I hope you eventually did.
I was feared to go out and play with my pals. Honestly, and there's a kind of sound musical accompaniment to that as it's rising out, and oh my god.
It's a sort of crinkly noise, isn't it? Do you remember? So
and it goes up, and I was convinced that was out there. I just thought, no, it's out there. I'm not going out. I was totally convinced myself.
Well, depending knowing whereabouts you live, there could be monsters around about your.
I had to be careful.
You've just
Michael.
Every possibility. Yeah.
You've just broken a memory for me, Peter. There was a film that made that same groaning noise that I saw when I was a kid. No, it wasn't that film you're thinking of. I was about 4, I think, and I've since found out it was called Shriek of the Mutilated, and it was this Yeti.
God, about the Yeti?
And it's an awful film. It's terrible. It's American. It's schlock. It's just awful. But that groaning noise terrified me as a kid.
Sometimes it's sound that does it, and that I'm afraid, that really enhanced, the visual disturbance that was going on in that scene. Whenever that appeared, I thought, here we go again,
The sound of the crinoid is what scared my sister, and I remember mimicking it around the house.
You are cruel.
And she was 23, you said?
You were 23, yeah.
Oh, God.
You know what, guys? It's not just also when it comes to scares and thrills and what makes something horror, is it? It's not just the performance, it's not just the writing, but it's how it's shot. And I want to just mention something that impressed me and still impresses me to this day, was when Doctor Who came back, we had the empty child. And some of the shots in this, Kirsty's just fainted. Some of the shots in this, I mean, that one there, it's got those sort of what I call the 1960s Batman angles, because they're not filmed straight on, and that suggests some sort of, I don't know, it's spooky to me. It shows that something's not quite correct. Do you understand what I mean by this? And I love this particular photograph because it encapsulates what was going on. The direction in this was really good. I'll just change the angle. Pete, is that something that horror films used to do a lot?
Well, look at the one scene in Psycho. I don't know if you've got that frame.
Keep talking, I'll find it.
The overhead. It's an overhead shot. I mean, obviously that's the one. My God, right.
That was terrifying, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Now, that's a big jump scare if you've seen that scene.
You're just not expecting it.
No, the angle that's taken from it just throws you completely. I know the shower scene gets all the credit, but by God, I mean, that is a very, very worthy follow-up to that scene. And
I
again,
agree. That was
Bernard
the shot that
Herrmann's
frightened me the most.
Strings coming in, and yeah, that's clever, very clever.
So it's good to know that, obviously a lot of the directors that we have around now are still influenced by these old classic films, and they see these and they pick these up as they're watching them through their youth, and then they bring them into it. Because, that Empty Child episode was full of these weird angles, and really brought home the whole aspect of what was a little bit off kilter, what was taking what we thought we knew about historical accuracy and then spinning it in a Doctor Who way. And very, very clever, and then quite gruesome. Blech.
Go on, Kirst. That's another episode I remember, because it's the first series as well. And I still remember that broadcast as well, and being like, "Wow!"
Did it scare you?
And my dad going, "Yeah, told you, Doctor Who."
No, that's pretty good, that one. I mean, it is. I mean, children all over the United Kingdom were, "Are you my mummy?" for months after this, weren't they? Absolutely.
I was. Still do.
Do they? Oh, God bless them.
Peter said this earlier on about its familiarity, something you can relate to. It's the World War II. You've seen gas masks before, but it's making you see them in a different light, like the Autons and Spear from Space. That kind of there's something you connect to that you've seen before.
It's subverting something. Just like you've got the clown in it. You associate the clowns with circus, and then you're putting that's displacement.
Yeah.
As Robert Bloch said, and actually taking something and subverting it. And just like they did in Jaws as well, the idyllic beach, everybody going for a nice swim. Oh no, we can't do that anymore because there's a shark killing people.
A wise man once said, "There's nothing more alarming than coming home and finding a Yeti on your toilet in Tooting Beck."
He did, and he was absolutely right, wasn't he? He was absolutely right.
Well,
we had that as well. Yeah, I mean, Pertwee knew what he was talking about when this sort of stuff, because some of his, although you don't actually associate necessarily the whole horror genre with the Pertwee era, well, there are examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, plastic people, Pete. This is another sort of classic horror thing, isn't it? Really, plastic people or whatever. I mean, this was just hitting the nail on the head, surely.
Plastic people, yeah.
Dead eyes again. Dead eyes at that.
Giant spiders. There's plenty of horror.
That's the one thing it taps into personal. That's how being very subjective as well taps into personal anxieties. So if you're arachnophobic, I mean, I happen to have a fear of like dolls, because I was traumatized. There was a girl that was staying quite close to us that had a ventriloquist doll in a box.
Oh.
And that was the first. I had no idea what was in the box. And she threw the lid open, and this doll came flying out, laughing diabolically. And I must have ran. I can't run from to save myself, but I ran that day. I ran and ran and ran, and that frightened me. Dolls. Did
you have a problem with Talons of Wen Chiang then?
Anything like that, Terror of the Autons, anything, that kind of plastic thing that's moving on its own, that shouldn't happen in my mind. That's wrong, and that freaked me out.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things about the plastic, of course, Paul, was, and this is one of your memories, isn't it? The plastic actually went a little bit crazy, didn't it? I mean, what's this for you?
Well, this wasn't a character that you get to know very, very well, but he was a member of the army. He was trying to support a unit. And then he goes to the plastics factory to get, this is General Scobie, and he gets a double made of him. And the cliffhanger to end of part 3 into part 4, the real General Scobie opens the door, and standing in the doorway is an absolute mirror image of himself as an Auton. And this is the shot, and that was petrifying.
Yeah.
And just you can hear him groaning that he's going to be killed by him just as the titles kick in, and it's an amazing cliffhanger. And what the Autons, what they did with some of the actors, they made them look really sweaty, really plasticky. And they did that with some of the orderlies in the hospital that kidnapped the doctor, and Channing as well. They all look very, very sort of plasticky, sweaty looking, and look really, really creepy. And that has the same image. That really petrified me. I think I remember seeing it on the repeat of it before season 8, around the season 8 time, I think. But
any kind of doll-like things, anything come. There's an excellent film that is not about a doll coming to life, really, as such, but it's called Magic with Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah.
And it's a psychological horror film where the ventriloquist is tormented by his own dummy, and he believes it's got a life of its own.
They made an original version with Michael Redgrave as well, didn't they, in the 50s?
Dead of Night, one of the episodes of that, it's definitely influenced by that, but it's an outstanding film. Anthony Hopkins in an early role, and watching that film, you just think he's going to go places.
But psychologically, Pete, that whole subject plays an important part in Doctor Who, and many times throughout these, because it goes hand in hand with some of these sort of horror type episodes, doesn't it, guys? You got all this, the suggestion type of stuff, the little things in your. We're still seeing it now when it comes to all this, and again, in part 3 of this series of Wholloween, we're going to be talking about this story, but this sort of emphasized what Pete was just saying there, the suggestion. Certain things, and of course in this one you're not allowed to blink, which is an absolute essential human need. You've got to do it. We don't know we're doing it because we do it so quickly, but in this story it's all about that psychological element there of knowing that you can't do it, and that's why it's one of the many reasons that episode works, really, apart from the fact that you're dealing with something that's stone, which I don't think I'd ever seen before, Pete.
No, I mean, that again was probably, you think back to things that, you, as you've mentioned there, things that you do ordinarily that are part of life, blinking, just like sleeping. And that's why A Nightmare on Elm Street, that's why that works so well, because that's where you're killed in your own dream. So what do? They drink loads of coffee. They're actually eating coffee granules to stay awake. They're terrified to go to sleep. A very natural thing, so all of that is foreign part. But what I think they could do in Doctor Who, to keep up with something that's going to resonate with people today, the biggest threat, loss of identity. And that seems to manifest in a lot of stories in different forms and fashions. So bringing it up to today's standards, loss of identity and some kind of inventive way would be good.
That's a great idea, Pete. I'm paraphrasing another YouTuber here, but Doctor Who these episodes used to be about something, didn't they? About those sort of phobias. These days, it just feels like it's about itself. So it's I think that if we could get it back into dealing with fears, real fears and phobias, and have the courage to do that. And I don't just mean a couple. I mean all fears that are contemporary, but do it in an allegorical way. Would be fantastic.
It would work. It would work, Michael, because of course Doctor Who's been doing it on and off with the subject of religion for decades, and cults as well for decades. I mean, one of the ones I want to talk about very quickly when it comes to cult is one of the ones that scared me to death when I was a kid, which was Image of the Fendal. Now, there's something about this story that even now, again, we're talking psychologically, I can watch this very happily at this time of year because it screams Halloween to me. It just, but what happens to this wonderful character who you don't really get to know as well? It's blooming scary. And she becomes this whole figure, doesn't she? This whole leader of this. What actually, it's got a Doctor Who edge there. Yes, it is alien. Yeah, the Fendal are from a different planet. Yes, they are. The Doctor knows about them, but it is all this sort of. You've got this sort of cultish thing beginning around, haven't you? Really, and there is a real danger there, but it really is tying in with what you've just been saying there.
Meddling in things you don't understand in
the name of science. Something else that's in common with the Cybermen, for example, and other
Yeah,
things
yeah.
that are going on now. You know, these shows are actually warnings, but they're never really heard. Anyone else get really nightmares about this one?
Look at those eyes, my God.
Yeah, the eyes are just giving me nope.
Popping out.
And such a clever bit of makeup. At the end of the day, it just painted
I
on the
remember the
eyelids.
Fendaline. The Fendaline being quite scary. They had a real kind of snorting noise as they came past. You know, they creep past, and you'd hear the sound of Dick Mills with the Swarf figure making the sound effect as he went past. You know, and this kind of slippery sound that really creeped me out. I remember particularly the noise. You didn't really see them; just saw the tail going past.
I remember being scared of the. Yeah. I remember being scared of the aftermarket price of the Fendaline action figure, Paul.
I've got it here. Look, there it is. There.
Oh, me, that's a hard one to get, isn't it?
Blooming scary is really big. I mean, again, it was. I mean, again, Stones of Blood, something very similar in that style. You know, the year after the Stones of Blood, which was broadcast around about this time of year when it was dark. So similar to what you guys were saying there about, you know, Pete, you said you couldn't go out. I had a similar instance with the Stones of Blood after that episode where they came to life, and then those two innocent people that are there just thrown in casually to kill them off in the story, brilliantly, by the way, and drains their blood. And then I'm expected to go to a bonfire night immediately after that in the pitch black. You know what I mean? I'm like, I remember I've been very trepidatiously stepping out of the kitchen door into the darkness. Go, okay, right, what's going on?
The thing that you Brits have got an advantage of in horror is as can be displayed on the screen here, is fog and forests. They go so well together, don't they? And that just Stones of Blood just made me think of it. There's a creepiness about, there's an old world creepiness about. So I'm talking as a you know, an Australian.
Michael, but that's a very interesting point there. Would you say, as an Australian, would you say that is something that attracts foreign audiences to?
Oh God, yeah.
Doctor Who, but
absolutely. When I went to Edinburgh for the first time, all the stories and the historical stories.
You can feel the ghosts in Edinburgh. We all know Edinburgh. You can feel the ghosts there.
Most of them are true, Michael. Most of them. So.
I loved it. I absolutely. I was there for the Edinburgh Fringe a couple of times, which was scary in itself. But
even more so now.
But what I loved was when the festival was over and everyone left, and just to explore that creepy old world thing that only Britain does so well.
Just
I think
got a great sense of atmosphere and unease about it.
It has. It's mystery as well, isn't it? If you haven't been to Edinburgh, you've got to come to Edinburgh because you can feel the weight of history there, and it's got an incredible history in Edinburgh. But you can feel the ghosts there as well, especially at this sort of year when it's going darker in the air, because you're aware of all the things that have happened. I'm not going to be too graphic here, even though it's the horror show. There was lots of nasty things that have gone on there. But yeah, I mean, it's just fantastic.
But I think that's why
we need Doctor Who in Edinburgh.
Yeah, that's why Doctor Who works so well with the spooky atmospheres, because you know where you live has its elements of creepiness about it because of the history. We've got other creepy things here that have 8 legs and live in rivers and big lizards and things like that, but that's a different sort of creepy. But incidentally, that was the one that stayed with me, was Planet of the Spiders, because I am arachnophobic and we do have very big spiders in this country. I was always checking my back as a kid. I thought there was a spider on my back. I don't know about big lizards, but have you got these? Pretty close. Yeah. I mean, they were quite scary for a whole generation. Their heads don't fall off in the water over here. I remember John Pertwee saying at a convention that I saw him at, he said when they were filming that, all he could hear was the actors inside, "Oh, I've lost me bloody head, Gov."
I love it. I mean, you're talking about Jaws, Pete, but Doctor Who got there first, because surely some of the kids would have been absolutely terrified of going into the water after seeing the sea devils come out of it.
That's a good point, actually.
It's a beautiful moment.
Very well done, really effective.
Well,
sometimes it's the most simple things that are the most effective.
It's also like the creature from the lagoon, isn't it, or something like that?
Lagoon,
I think that's what it's reminiscent of, you know.
Well, we had it in Curse of Fenric, and we had it in Full Circle as well with the Marshman coming out of the. But you know, it's just iconic. If you're going to do something like that, do it. Go for it. And do it.
I'm not.
That's what I was heavily disappointed. Sorry, Michael. I was heavily disappointed with the Sea Devils that we just had recently. That I was like, no, I would have preferred the Sea Devils from OG, because they were quite scary compared to what we just had recently. It was heavily for someone who was actually having a Sea Devils episode for the first time. I was like, nah. I was a bit disappointed with the hype.
Oh, what a shame!
The
costumes look great.
Was dreadful.
The costumes look good.
Yeah, costumes were great. Yeah.
And I'm not being funny, guys. When I talk about the crocodiles in Australia, if you go up to Northern Australia, North Queensland, where I was actually fairly recently, there's signs by the water saying don't go within 5 feet of the water because of crocodiles. And I genuinely don't go in the water. No big signs, no swimming, crocodiles. And so you're very conscious of not going near the water. And I genuinely, as a kid, when I grew up that way, thought of the Sea Devils. In my head. It was like the Sea Devils. These ancient reptiles are in there, and they're going to. So that the Sea Devil scare resonated to me on an everyday sort of level.
Yeah. Because again, it's Doctor Who. It's best when it's bringing that horror element of fantasy in with what actually we know. So you've got the link there because you see these big beasts, the alligators and the crocodiles. You see them when you go up to visit.
Yeah, only up north. They're not
up north, in Australia. You know, and it's just it's when you piece things like that together, isn't it? Really, because you just know that in the stories, of course, the Silurians and the Sea Devils, they don't mind these things because it's pets. They are pets and they control them. It's made. I want to just talk about very quickly the role. Pete, you're big on this one as well. Religion. I did mention it before. Religion has played a big part in horror for one reason or another. Lots of different stories have come off this, and Doctor Who has been no stranger to that as well. The biggest one that stands out for me was this: when poor old Toby got zapped by the demon, by the beast. Now, this actually, I think hopefully you'll all remember, this actually did upset various people back when it was screened in 2006 for going a little bit over mark, because the 2 episodes that were the Satan Pit and the Beast Below, I mean, they were scary. And again, Gabrielle Wolfe came back to do the voice of the Beast after, so many years away from originally playing Sutekh in Pyramids of Mars. But what is it about this element which ties in that whole thing about, religion with taking people over, and that side of it, the other side, the beast side of religion, people? What is it about that really frightens us?
I just think it's because you think you are at the mercy of something that you're not in control of, that's in control of you and has that greater power. And you know that unless you have your faith, then there's very little hope for you. And I think maybe sometimes then it's maybe the regret if you didn't have your faith and you thought, God, if God can't help me now, who will? You're at the mercy of a demon. And I think that's terrifying.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great episode, JT. Really, I wish it was more like that, more scary like that, because it's that temptation of what does it take for me to go over the edge? What does it take for me to become, dare I say, evil, or that dark?
Well, this was evil.
Lure.
Yeah, you should say it. Yeah.
It's. I mean, it's as old as the hills, isn't it? That whole concept of the devil and being tempted and turning away from the
episode,
good.
do they? But it's definitely the devil, isn't it? So.
It's suggested. Yeah. I mean,
they never say it. Too scared. It's a devil from another universe, isn't it? Really, but yeah.
And we've had it in Doctor Who before with things like the demons and stuff like that. But in that story, it didn't go into that. That was more of the cult element we were just talking about. But with this one, it is borderline religion, because it's tying in all the faiths of the universe, if you like.
Yeah.
And as Michael's alluding to, that is evil. It was.
Do you know what I did love about that episode? There was a rare element of humility in modern Doctor Who from the character of the Doctor, because the character of the Doctor these days he seems to be, you know, all-knowing and just infallible. But there was a moment there of, hang on, he's questioning his own knowledge and what he knows, and I loved that. It was back to Pertwee saying, you know, it's my greed, Sarah, my greed for knowledge. You know, it had the Doctor finally just questioning himself. I mean, I don't like the whole space Jesus thing with Doctor Who these days, but I liked it when he was a traveler and he was an explorer, and sometimes, and he was the smartest person in the room. But sometimes he would question his own knowledge and think, "Hang on, maybe I don't know everything." And I thought David Tennant played that really well.
I totally agree with that, actually. Yeah, because you're absolutely right. This was the Doctor going, "I don't know it." You're absolutely spot on, and it was played perfectly. Do you know what else got me, Michael? Because you and I are big on this sort of stuff. Was the soundtrack? It was the music. And do you remember? It was that sort of. Was it a violin or was it a? It was just spooky in itself on that, and that actually, Pete, reminded me of some of the older horror elements from the old days, and specifically, if I can say it, The Omen, where this sort of orchestral element played a part of the story. It was creating not whimsy, it was creating a mood which was suggesting, not just reflecting on your own beliefs, but on what was going on around you, and possibly being open to the idea that this thing was down a well, you know, another sort of horror element, controlling that sort of. I mean, it was just wonderful scripts there.
Yeah, and I think that's very unnerving as well, is the fact that somebody who you feel that you know and trust is the hero, if he shows that vulnerability, you know, and it's like almost admission of a flaw and that I don't know everything, and you think there's a weakness there. Oh, help! You know, we're relying on you. You know, so where does that leave us? You know, and that. That's really unsettling, I think, you know, but very, very effective. It's not a flaw, you know, by any matter of means. I just think it makes it more credible and more frightening.
I totally agree. And with the character of the Doctor, you know, who we've had in our lives for so long, we've grown up with him. You know, when he has that minute there, we doubt ourselves as well, don't we? You know, we're all basically saying, hang on a minute, if he's not sure about this, and we've seen that with the various Doctors since Doctor One. You know, there has been that element. I mean, going back to what we were saying about Pyramids of Mars, in that one, the Doctor is terrified of Sutekh. He's trying to underplay it, but he's terrified of them. There are moments when Pertwee, especially when dealing with the demons, there's that element where John plays that. Do you remember this? Where he's like, this is different. What am I going to do here?
I like when the Doctor's a bit fallible.
Yes.
Well, like I said earlier, when the Doctor goes to face his fear, or when the Great One makes him turn around, and she said she can feel his fear, that is a scary moment.
Yeah. It's actually a brilliant moment, isn't it? Because I don't know about you guys, I might be again being a little bit too geeky and reading too much in it, but when she says that to him, you can think, hang on, is this the Doctor bottling up his fear from day one of his adventures? And he does bottle it up, and in which case now, where is it today? You know, because it must be loads of it somewhere in him now. All this fear that he bottles and puts away. I mean, that can be quite dangerous in a character position, you know, which could be explored in another horror sort of suspenseful story.
And
I mean, what happens if the Doctor's fear escapes?
And Ken Poe pointing out his shortcomings. You know, that I found that unnerving. And
JT, can I just say, you can be geeky here, it's allowed.
Yes. I know. I'm hoping that everybody watching this is just as bad as we are.
I found that genuinely unnerving when he said, oh, yeah, he's talking about my greed, Sarah. And she said, oh, my greed for knowledge, for information.
Yeah, different sort of greed. Yeah.
Hang on, the Doctor's not necessarily, he has shortcomings.
He really does.
Whereas now he doesn't. He's perfect.
Well, let's have a look at that, because as I said at the top of the show, I want to ask everybody here as well, you know, does horror as we know it, this classic British sense of horror, is it still there, Pete? Is it still around? Do we all think that sort of horror that we all grew up with and that we're all affectionate about, and which we're paying homage to tonight, does it have a place in 21st century Who, in this very sensitive, overly sensitive entertainment business that we're having to deal with?
Yes, I think it does, because honestly, things are just becoming ridiculous. The fact that people are offended by just about anything, you know, and it's become a bit of a kind of snowflakey thing. I'm fed up with it. And I do think we need a kick up the butt and just get back to old-fashioned scares, sensibilities have changed, but I think if you do it right and you tap into something that people can relate to, very kind of primal fears, and it's done properly, and something that can resonate with people in today's world in a very simple but subtle way, I think it would work wonderfully well.
Amen.
Yeah.
So you guys agree with that, yeah?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, it's also culturally everything's become a bit homogenized as well. Like, we were talking about the American horror versus the British spooks. Now it's all just a bit generic, cut. And
That's a good point.
It all looks the same.
Yeah, good point.
Doctor Who had an advantage being, Doctor Who and spooky. It had an advantage over other. I'm not being I know I'm being silly, but it had that. It had that. That's the advantage it had that made it unique, and that's what the Americans liked about it. Whereas now, and I'm not just Doctor Who, everything. It's all become very much
formatted,
cookie cutter.
But every fan or a cliched where people talk about Doctor Who is you used to hide behind the sofa when you watched it.
Yeah,
and that's what its reputation preceded it most of the time.
That's right.
And I think it needs to go back to that, because that's when Doctor Who works at its best. Is when it's scary. And as Michael said earlier, they can punctuate it occasionally with an odd gag just to relax you a little bit, relieve the tension, then go back to the scares. And that's what it does so well. So yes. I think people love to be scared, and it's worth keeping that in mind to create a good atmosphere and make the show work as a scary show again. And that's what it needs to be, I think.
And I think a lot of productions, they rely on that Whedon-esque Buffy quip sort of formula, which worked brilliantly in Buffy. Joss Whedon did it perfectly.
Yeah, but it was of its time, Michael. Do you not think?
It was, but and also in Angel, it worked very well because the scares would then come back in. Whereas now with television, generally, everyone's just quippy and smug, and there's no real jeopardy. It's like there's the bad guy. Oh yeah, well,
it's too self-aware, isn't it?
And that's it. There should be a little bit of Slay Queen, and hang on, that thing could kill me. So
I would love to see someone who's doing that sort of stuff bumped off very, very quickly.
Yeah,
I'm with you.
At the end of the day, I mean, it's escapism. Really, it's just fantasy, and I think it's quite cathartic as well when you're watching it. After you've watched it, you feel that relief. That was really good. And
it's like a roller coaster ride.
Roller coaster,
at a theme park.
The adrenaline rush.
That's what I miss as well about programs. Like during lockdowns and whatnot, I was watching Deep Space Nine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Started getting into Star Trek.
Yeah.
And I miss, and it goes along with Doctor Who as well. I miss stories like that would leave you psychologically scared, or you're like, oh, this is scary, or also thinking, how would you handle that situation?
Yeah.
Nowadays, and especially, I don't want to come across as a slay queen, but as a girl, I'm getting fed up with stories that I could pummel all you boys, apparently, which
well, to be
wouldn't
fair,
really work straight away, and that because I'm a girl, apparently I'm the bestest thing ever. I miss, girls are cool, but we're not always, there's layers to characters, and I miss that again. And I just miss stories that a female character can be strong.
Yeah,
exactly.
But there's also flaws. The same with guy characters as well. And I just miss stories that makes you actually think, and maybe you've watched the episodes, dinner time, you then go to do the dishes, put the dishwasher on, and it makes you actually contemplate. That's what I'm desperately wanting back.
There's all the nuances and the fact that there's nobody's one dimensional.
Yeah,
there's more.
That's right.
To a character than just defining it by a certain attribute.
Ticking a box. Yeah. So.
I mean, look at to reference Buffy again. She was the classic kick-ass female lead. But boy, look at her when her mum died. She didn't know what to do. She was completely
mummy.
Lost.
But you can also argue the fact that Buffy, as I say, of the time, was based on a lot of incredible, strong characters that have preceded her, including the likes of Princess Leia, our very own Doctor Who girls. You know, lots of
Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah, like Romana.
Yeah, Romana, both of her. Yeah, I mean, are we thinking? So we're thinking as a panel here on the show, horror does have a place in it. I mean, what are the chances? What do you think could happen? Do you think they're going to go down this route, or do you actually think? I mean, this image grabbed from the trailer. It's a brilliant image of the celestial toy maker doing what he does. He's controlling puppets, which happens to be, according to the trailer as it is now, the Doctor and Donna in a setting. It's a great, but that does look it looks like it could be quite horror genre based to me.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely unsettling, isn't it?
It's quite scary for an adult to look at. If you're a kid, it'll be fantastic.
I'm hoping with the Blue Yonder that it's going to be some sort of cliffhanger, because with the posters that released yesterday, he's only in the last one. So maybe it's something brewing and it's going to be a cliffhanger. And that's another thing as well that we're missing nowadays, that these kids are getting episodes dropped all in a winner and they're not having water cooler moments. Because it's going to be a weekly thing, that it's going to be a cliffhanger and we're going to be in a situation going, hurry up Saturday again. I'm hoping that it's going to be something that's going to leave our jaws on the floor ready for that episode. I'm hoping as well that it's going to be horrific.
You've hit the nail on the head there when it comes to the importance of cliffhangers in horror, hasn't she, Pete? Because we all grew up with cliffhangers. Obviously, through 24, 26 weeks of Doctor Who, you were there every week watching this thing, wanting to know how they would get out of it. I mean, Pete, from your point of view as a horror aficionado, cliffhangers, would they is there still a place for a cliffhanger?
I think so, but I mean, I think fear and the scare factor is in Doctor Who's DNA, and it's passed from generation to generation. Because parents will be telling their children, "Oh, I remember when I used to watch Doctor Who when I was a wee one," and blah blah blah, and they would tell them. So, I think the expectation is there, so it's integral to the story of whatever story comes about. It's a central idea of the threat, of the villain. I mean, you go to see pantomimes, the villain always gets the best reaction for the audience. Always have. You root for you don't root for the baddie, but the boo, the hiss, that comes from the audience. They love all that. So that's got to be there too. Yeah.
Well, you never know in the new series what you could get. I mean,
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, let's just hope it goes on. I mean, there are certain things that are going to scare the life out of me in the new series. That's a different sort of horror, actually, Who viewers, isn't it? But that is going to keep me up at night, I can assure you right now, and I'm looking forward to reviewing that episode here on the channel. Oh, good Lord. And in case you were wondering,
has it been announced what character they're going to be?
The greatest, bestest ever villain in the world and the universe ever.
It's going to be the
Rani. I heard, or is it just what? I've been hearing Rani theories as well, and I hope not as well.
All right, well, that's a show in the future. In case you were wondering, we mentioned very, 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 very briefly, but yes, one of the biggest horror aspects of Doctor Who is, of course, this lot. And stay tuned to the channel, because we've got lots more to do with the Daleks coming up through the 60th anniversary, I can assure you. We haven't forgotten them. They deserve their own shows, though, don't they? They do. Well, listen, we're coming to the end of part 2 of our trilogy of Wholloween here on the channel. What's coming up next, just to let you know, as part of Wholloween season, is on Halloween night itself, the 31st of October, myself and the WHOTASTIC panel will be looking at Blink, which is arguably a modern Doctor Who classic. So please join us for that with your views and your opinions of Blink, because within a blink of an eye, it will be along. Oh, well, that
was good. What were you saying about scary silences there, Kirsty?
No, there's the tumbleweed going past there. Absolutely. So for now, though, don't forget, please do like the video if you enjoyed the video. Please leave your comments about Whorrific Who down on the below the video as well. Don't forget also to share, God love it. New album out now. It's wonderful. And again, thank you very much to the Whotastic panel, to Kirsty, to Michael, to Paul, and to our very special guest here, to Peter. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed the show.
Thank you. It's been great fun, guys. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
Enjoyed your company.
Cheers.
And yours. Thank you very much. Good night, folks.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, everybody, for watching us. Stay tuned. We will be back very soon. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.